Welcome back. We're going to finish Indicator 1.6 by looking at the influence of the controversies over foreign policy and the election of 1800. Let's review today's objective. You should be able to analyze the development of the two-party system by the end of these videos. In this video, you will identify conflicts over foreign policy, identify key points of Washington's farewell address, and summarize the importance of the election of 1800. Differences over domestic policy were exacerbated by even more differences in opinion over foreign policy. Support or opposition for the French Revolution, and events such as the Citizen Genet incident, Jay's Treaty, and the XYZ affair heightened disagreements over foreign policy in the new nation. Jefferson, Madison, and the Democratic Republicans supported the French in the French Revolution despite the bloodshed of their revolution. They supported the French because the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen was very similar to the Declaration of Independence, and because the French alliance had been key during the American Revolution. Hamilton and the Federalists opposed involvement in the French Revolution and chose to support the British in their war against the excesses of the French Revolution. This stemmed from the long tradition and trade relationships the Americans had with their former mother country. This disagreement was heightened by events such as the Citizen Genet incident, Jay's Treaty, and the XYZ affair that cumulatively led to the Alien and Sedition Acts. The Citizen Genet incident occurred in 1793 when French ambassador Charles Genet came to the United States to rally support for the French Revolution. He was denied the support he had asked for because Washington felt the U.S. was too fragile to get involved in the struggles of other nations. John Jay was an ambassador to the British in the early years of the Constitution. He negotiated a trade treaty with the British that settled outstanding issues between the two countries that had been left unresolved since the American independence. It was immensely unpopular with the American people. After serving 2 terms, Washington was ready to retire to Mount Vernon and elections were held. The Federalist candidate was John Adams, George Washington's vice president, who ran against the Democratic Republican Thomas Jefferson. Adams won the presidency by a small margin, but the election signaled a sectional divide between the North and the South, and the industrialists and the farmers. Pause and consider these questions. Can you identify which party supported which foreign power and why? Can you identify other international influencers of conflict between the parties? Do you know who ran in the election of 1796? When you're ready, move on to the next section. Before leaving office, George Washington gave a farewell address to the nation, hoping to demonstrate to the people the strengths of the nation and its democratic ideals. Washington set the precedent for presidents to serve no more than 2 terms of 4 years each, which would be followed until the 1940s with the election of FDR for 4 consecutive terms. Washington warned in his farewell address of 2 key things he feared would hurt the nation. First was political partisanship, dividing the nation into political parties. And the second was alliances. Washington advocated for neutrality, fearing alliances would injure the nation. The U.S. had a small military and a weak, almost non-existent navy. We weren't prepared to get involved in the business of other countries. One provision of Jay's Treaty severely limited the ability of nations that were hostile to Great Britain to trade in U.S. ports, such as France. President John Adams sent Charles Pinckney, John Marshall, and Elbridge Gerry to France to negotiate. However, when they arrived, the French minister Talleyrand's representatives demanded that the U.S. pay a bribe. The Americans refused. Americans were appalled by the French's disrespectful treatment of the American diplomats. This was the first struggle of the Adams presidency and helped bring countrywide support to his administration. Shortly thereafter, Adams would pass the Alien and Sedition Acts. These acts led the Federalists in Congress to place restrictions on citizenship and political speech. The Alien Acts restricted the activities of foreign residents in the United States and their attempts at citizenship. The Sedition Acts restricted freedom of speech in the United States, particularly in response to the XYZ affair, and outlawed any false, scandalous, and malicious writing against Congress and/or the President, and made it illegal to conspire to oppose any measures or the measures of government. The question then becomes, are these acts constitutional? Thomas Jefferson and James Madison penned what are known as the Virginia and Kentucky Resolutions. The legislatures in Kentucky and Virginia took the position that the Alien and Sedition Acts were infringing upon states' rights and thus were unconstitutional. These states were attempting to nullify or supersede a federal law. Remember, according to the Supremacy Clause of the Constitution, federal law is supreme above all others. The controversy over states' rights will continue to fester throughout the next 60 years. The Alien and Sedition Acts caused a large downturn in support for Adams and contributed to Jefferson's success in the 1800 election. This election sees a flip in political partisanship within the nation. John Adams only served one term, losing the election of 1800 to his vice president, Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson's election demonstrated the first peaceful transfer of power, with Adams leaving the Capitol the night before Jefferson's inauguration. Pause and think about these questions. Can you identify 2 key points of Washington's farewell address? Can you summarize the Alien and Sedition Acts? How did Jefferson and Madison react to the Alien and Sedition Acts? What are the constitutional conflicts of the Sedition Acts and the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions? When you're sure you can answer these questions, move on to the day's activities. If you still have questions, check in with your teacher.